Recently, I discovered an interactive and informative web page about national debt from the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development UNCTAD. You can find the URL on your screen. It's a great resource, so I encourage you to check it out for yourself. In this video, we'll dive into the national debt data for the key countries, China and the United States. Why these two? The geopolitical rivalry between them will significantly influence global dynamics in the coming decades. Understanding their economic performance is crucial. Let's start with the United States. In this comparison, we're looking at the United States alongside the average for both developed and developing countries. There are 6 categories and 18 key metrics to explore, starting with public debt. So, what exactly is public debt? Also called government or national debt, it's the total amount a government owes to external creditors, whether individuals, businesses, or other nations. I've also created a separate video diving into the top countries holding U.S. debt. If you're curious, you can find the link in the description below. Now, let's get back to today's topic. On this chart, the blue dot represents the United States, the orange dot represents developed countries, and the gray dot represents developing countries. When we look at public debt as a share of GDP, the U.S. is about 14% higher than the average for developed nations and 50% above developing nations. The highest debt to GDP ratio belongs to Sudan, exceeding 300%. Given the U.S.'s massive GDP, it's no surprise that in terms of total dollar value of national debt, the U.S. far surpasses any other country, more than double that of China, which ranks second. Next, we have national debt per capita. In the U.S., public debt per citizen is around $100,000, significantly higher than both developed and developing nations. An interesting case is Singapore, a small country with a population of around 4 million. Most of its external debt consists of deposits held by overseas banks and depositors in Singapore's banks. What's remarkable is that the investment returns more than cover the debt servicing costs, essentially resulting in positive returns from such debts. We'll revisit this point later when we dive into debt interest payments. Next, let's look at external public debt. You'll notice that for both categories related to external debt, the U.S. shows 0 values. This might seem puzzling, but let me explain. Although foreign governments and investors like China and Japan hold significant amounts of U.S. debt, it's classified as domestic because it's issued in U.S. dollars. Rather than borrowing directly from foreign institutions, the U.S. sells its debt on its own market, which foreign entities then purchase. This gives the U.S. a significant advantage, as the U.S. dollar serves as the global reserve currency, a benefit that has bolstered the U.S. economy for decades. To understand this, just compare GDP growth between the U.S. and Europe over the years. We'll skip these 2 categories for now. Now, let's discuss public debt interest payments. The U.S. spends 3% of its GDP annually on interest for its massive public debt, and this number is rising, well above the global average of 2%. It also consumes 10% of the government's total revenue. The higher this share, the more vulnerable a country becomes to potential bankruptcy. At the extreme end is Sri Lanka, where nearly 80% of government revenue goes toward debt interest payments. In the U.S., each citizen shoulders an annual burden of $2,000 in debt interest payments, the highest in the world. Coming back to Singapore, you may have noticed that some countries actually generate positive income from the debts they hold. Leading the list is Kuwait, with Norway close behind in second place. So, after accumulating such significant debt, how does the government allocate the funds, especially in areas like education, public health, and public investment? Public investment expenditure refers to government spending on long-term projects and assets designed to boost economic productivity and provide broad public benefits. This includes investments in infrastructure, education, healthcare, and other essential services that contribute to sustainable growth and citizen well-being. In the U.S., about 5% of GDP is spent on education, which is slightly below the average for developed nations. On public health, the U.S. allocates nearly 10% of its GDP. Given its massive GDP, the U.S. invests significantly more in healthcare compared to other countries, but still experiences poorer health outcomes. The focus has often been on factors like high costs of prescription drugs and administrative expenses as major contributors to this issue. When it comes to public investment, the U.S. lags significantly behind other developed nations. Low public investment expenditure has already showing its impact across various aspects of American life and economy. Deteriorating infrastructure, reduced productivity, worsening income inequality, increased dependency on debt, lower long-term competitiveness, and you name it. The final category assesses the debt burden in relation to development spending. In all three metrics, the United States shows a higher debt burden compared to other developed nations. Its debt levels are comparable to those of developing countries, which typically incur higher debt for development projects. Now, let's turn to China. China's public debt stands at about 84% of GDP, notably lower than the U.S. at 122%. In absolute terms, China's debt is less than half of that of the United States. Per capita, the debt burden for Chinese citizens is only 1/10 of that for Americans, which is significantly lower. Regarding external public debt, China has one of the lowest percentages relative to GDP. The total external debt is under $500 billion, with 85% of it denominated in US dollars. On a per capita basis, China ranks near the bottom among major economies. An interesting point to note is the share of external public debt held by private creditors. This metric shows how much of a country's external debt is owed to private entities like banks, investment funds, and individuals, versus public entities such as other governments or international organizations. Nearly 90% of China's external debt is owed to private creditors, which is quite high. For comparison, Russia has the highest share with nearly 100% of its external debt owed to private creditors. In terms of interest payments, China spends less than 1% of its GDP, compared to 3% for the United States. This is significantly below the average for both developing and developed countries. Additionally, only 3.5% of China's government revenue goes towards servicing debt interest, while the U.S. allocates over 10%. On a per capita basis, each Chinese citizen bears a burden of about $118 in debt interest, which is just 6% of the $2,000 per capita interest burden in the United States. China allocates 3.3% of its GDP to education, which is relatively low compared to the nearly 5% spent by the United States and also below the average for both developed and developing countries. The same trend is seen in public health expenditure. However, when it comes to public investment expenditure, China stands out. It invests a substantial 14% of its GDP in public projects, whereas the U.S. spends only 3.3%. This significant investment helps explain why China is often referred to as the world's factory and provides context for the Belt and Road Initiative. If you're interested in learning more about the Belt and Road Initiative, I've included a link to my other video in the description. In the final category, China's rate is similar to the average for developed countries and notably lower than that of developing countries, whereas the United States aligns more closely with the rates seen in developing nations. Overall, China's national debt situation appears to be in significantly better shape compared to that of the United States. What are your thoughts on this? Share your views and leave comments below. Thank you for watching.